I was 19, the year my bones finally made me afraid of my own future. By then, I had already broken myself 3 times. The first time, I was 7. I slipped off the low stone step outside our house while chasing a chicken. It was hardly a fall at all, more of a stumble. But my forearm snapped like a dry twig. I remember the white flash of pain, the crooked angle of my wrist, my mother's scream. The second time, I tripped over a tree root near the well. My ankle took the weight, twisted, and suddenly I was on the ground, rolling, clutching at something that felt both on fire and made of glass. The village healer shook his head and muttered that some people were simply born fragile. The third time was the worst. I was 15, carrying a sack of rice into the storeroom. My foot caught on the threshold. I didn't even fall that hard. Just crashed sideways into a stack of baskets. One rib broke, then another. For weeks, every breath was a negotiation with pain. By then, the nickname had already settled on me like dust. Glass bones. They didn't mean it cruelly, not exactly. It was just true. When the old men in the village sat outside the tea house and talked about whose son would grow tall and strong, whose daughter could carry 2 buckets of water at once, no one mentioned me. I was the boy parents used as a warning. Don't climb so high. Do you want to end up like glass bones? My father was a medicine man. He had a gentle face and a back already bent from years of pounding herbs in a mortar. When the villagers brought him the sick or broken, he always moved as if nothing they showed him could surprise him or disgust him. He had delivered babies and set fractures, and once, when I was small, I watched him calmly extract an arrow from a soldier's leg while the man screamed and cursed. I thought if anyone could fix me, it would be him. He wrapped my broken arm, then my ankle, then my ribs with hands that seemed to know each bone by name. He brewed strong-smelling decoctions, fed me soups made from pig's feet and chicken bones, scolded me for clumsiness, then immediately apologized as if the anger wasn't really for me but for some invisible foe. "It's not normal," he muttered once when he thought I was asleep. "Such minor falls, such brittle bones. This isn't right." I pretended not to hear. I think both of us believed we had time. Time for another growth spurt, for some miracle tonic, for some herb he had not yet discovered in his old books. Time for my skeleton to suddenly remember how to be a proper, solid thing. Time, as it turned out, was the one medicine my father did not have. It happened near the end of autumn. The rains had passed, but the stone steps outside our house still held a damp slickness that never quite dried. My father was carrying a wooden basin of water from the well. I was in the yard grinding sesame seeds for a patient's medicine when I heard a sound. Not a crash, not a shout. Just a soft, wrong kind of thud. I turned. My father was on the ground, the basin on its side, water spreading out in a thin, shining pool. He wasn't moving. "Father?" He tried to push himself up, but his right leg refused to cooperate. When I hurried to his side and helped him sit, his face was pale and there was a tightness around his mouth I had never seen before, not even when he was removing arrowheads or cauterizing wounds. "It's nothing," he said, the way healers always say it when they know it is not nothing. "Just a slip. Help me inside." His hip had broken. Later he would explain to me, in that detached, clinical tone he used for other people's injuries, that a simple fall should not have caused that kind of fracture, but it had. We tried everything. Poultices, broths, the strongest bone-setting techniques he knew. He told me where to place my hands, how to pull gently, how to listen to the subtle grinding of misaligned bone. It was as if I were practicing on a stranger, not the man who had once lifted me onto his shoulders so I could pick persimmons off the highest branch. Weeks passed. His leg remained useless. The flesh around his hips began to soften and then to shrink. The muscles that had carried him across mountains in his youth wasted away while the bone inside refused to knit. He never complained, not once. But one night, When the wind was rattling the shutters and the pain had carved 2 deep lines between his eyebrows, he grabbed my wrist with surprising force. "Listen to me," he said. "We've spent our lives treating what people can see. Skin, muscles, organs. We forget that the true scaffolding is underneath. Anyone can be brave when the bones are strong. When the bones fail." He let the sentence trail off. He coughed, a deep rasp that seemed to come from his own skeleton. Little red threads appeared in the cloth he held to his mouth. "You have broken too many times already," he went on. "You must be careful. A life built on weak bones is like a house built on wet clay. It looks fine, until one day it sinks." He died before the winter finished its work on the fields. We buried him on a low hill overlooking the river. The villagers said kind things at the funeral, about how many lives he'd saved, how they would miss his calm voice and relentless hands. No one said anything about the fact that the man who had spent his life mending other people's bones had been undone by his own. I was left alone in the small house that smelled like dried roots and old paper. The medicine shelves still full, the ledger book still open on the table where he had been counting coins the day before he fell. And in the silent days that followed, one thought would not leave me. If a man like him could end up trapped in his own body by a single broken bone, what chance did I have? The answer arrived on a torn scrap of paper tucked into one of his oldest medicine books. I found it weeks later, while trying to decide whether I should keep the practice open or close it and go work for one of the traveling merchants down by the river. The book was thick, the cover cracked, the pages swollen with years of humidity. On the inside of the back cover, written in my father's stiff, careful hand, there were a few lines that he had never mentioned to me. Rumor from the Western Mountains, an old Taoist hermit more than 90 years of age, who has never broken a bone, fell from a cliff in his youth without fracture. Walks upright, knees strong, back straight. Locals call him the Old Man of Iron Bones. Maybe nothing but legend. There was no map, no directions, only 3 characters. Western Mountains Range. I read those lines again and again until the ink seemed to sink into my eyes. An old man who had never broken a bone, while I had 3 fractures before 20. A man who had fallen from a cliff and gotten up, while my father had been destroyed by a wet step. Legend or not, I knew one thing with a certainty that surprised me. If I stayed where I was, nothing about my bones would change. I would continue to move with fear, watching for uneven stones, avoiding ladders, calculating the risk of every path. One day I would miscalculate, one bad fall, and I would end like my father, staring at the ceiling, remembering all the steps I hadn't dared take when I still could. 2 days later, before I could talk myself out of it, I packed. I placed my father's book with the note into a cloth bundle. I took a small purse of coins, a change of clothes, a bamboo staff, and a few jars of simple medicine in case I needed to trade for food. I locked the house, gave the key to our closest neighbor, and told her she could use the garden and the well. "Where are you going?" she asked. "To the west," I said, "to look for a man whose bones don't break." She laughed, thinking I was making a joke to hide my grief. When she realized I wasn't, the laughter turned into a worried frown. "People go into those mountains and don't come back," she said. "What if he's not there?" "Then I come back the same as I left," I answered. "Weak bones and a short life. At least I will have walked a little farther on them." It was not a very good answer, but it was the only one I had. I turned my back on the river and walked toward the line of dark shapes on the horizon. The Western Mountains had been there all my life, a distant blue-gray wall that separated our warm, damp valley from the colder lands beyond. I had always thought of them as a backdrop, a painted scenery the gods had hung at the edge of my world. Now, as the days passed and that wall slowly grew into individual ridges and peaks, I realized how much I had underestimated them. The road narrowed, the air thinned and cooled. Rice fields gave way to scrubby hills, then to pine forests where the wind moved through the needles with a constant, restless whisper. By the time I reached the last town at the foothills, my legs ached in a deep, unfamiliar way. Not that sharp, brittle pain of breaking, but a steady heaviness, like each step was a conversation my bones were not used to having. I stopped at a roadside tavern to rest and ask questions. The owner was an old man with forearms like twisted roots. He sold rice wine from a clay jar and noodles from an enormous pot that seemed never to empty. "Have you heard?" I asked after a bowl of noodles had given me back my voice. "Of an old hermit they call the Old Man of Iron Bones, someone who lives high in these western mountains." The tavern keeper looked me over slowly, as if weighing not just my flesh but the structure beneath it. "Many hermits in these mountains," he said. "Some live on mist and air, some on other people's gullibility. What do you want with an old man's bones?" "My father wrote about him," I said, pulling the scrap of paper from the book in my satchel and smoothing it on the table. "He said this man had never broken a bone in 90 years. My own bones." I hesitated. "They break easily." The old man raised one bushy eyebrow. "So you want him to give you his bones?" He chuckled. "You're a little old for that kind of trading." I flushed. I want to learn how he kept them strong. The joking left his face. He picked up the scrap of paper, squinted at it, then sighed. "I have heard of someone like this," he admitted. "High up, on the northern spur of Mount Long Yin, the hunters speak of a white-bearded hermit who comes down once a year to trade herbs for salt. No one knows his real name. They say he walks on cliffs like a goat and carries firewood like a man half his age." My heart thudded against my ribs. "Can you tell me how to reach him?" The tavern keeper drank a long, slow swallow of wine, as if considering whether he was willing to be responsible for my fate. "The path is not marked," he said at last, "and it is not a real path so much as a collection of places where the mountain hasn't decided to kill you yet. But if you will insist on going." He pointed with his chin toward the window. "Follow the river upstream until it forks. Take the left fork until you reach a waterfall that looks like a white curtain. Behind it, there is a ledge. From there, the world stops being sensible." He traced the air with his finger, sketching ridges and turns, naming landmarks. 3 crooked pines bent like old men, a rock that looks like a sleeping tiger. Until my head swam with images. "Why are you telling me all this?" I asked. "You don't even know me," he shrugged. "You walk like someone who already hurts," he said. "If there is a man up there who knows how not to, maybe you should meet him before the mountain takes the choice away." That night, I slept on a pallet in the corner of the tavern, listening to the wind hammer against the wooden shutters. My legs throbbed, my back ached. The memory of my father lying helpless on his pallet burned behind my eyes. In the morning, I paid the tavern keeper with most of my remaining coins. He waved away a portion of it and pressed a small pouch into my hand. "Dried persimmons," he said, "for the climb. Don't drop them. You may need their sweetness at the top." I bowed and resumed walking. The mountain did its best to convince me to turn back. The path, when there was one, was nothing more than a strip of dirt clinging to the side of cliffs, wide enough for one careful foot at a time. Sometimes it vanished under fallen rock, and I had to test each surface with my staff to make sure it wasn't waiting to crumble under my weight. Twice I slipped. Both times, my body reacted the way it had been trained all my life, with full-blown panic. I could feel every bone anticipating the crack, bracing for the familiar shock of impact. But both times I managed to catch myself with the staff or grab onto a root. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would punch its own hole through my chest. "See," I muttered to my legs, "we can do this. Just don't give up on me." The trees thinned as I climbed, replaced by low shrubs whose leaves smelled sharp and medicinal. The air grew clearer, colder. Clouds drifted below me. The world I had grown up in houses, fields, the slow river became something that existed on the other side of a veil of mist. By the time I reached the waterfall the tavern keeper had described, my hands were blistered and trembling. The falls did look like a curtain, a sheet of white water pouring over the lip of a cliff, the sound so loud it shook the stones under my feet. Behind it, as he had promised, a narrow ledge led into a shallow cave where I could catch my breath. The damp air soaked through my clothes. I shivered, teeth chattering, and wondered, not for the first time, if I was chasing a ghost. Then I saw the smoke. A thin thread of it drifted upward from higher on the slope, blue-gray against the pale sky. Someone was up there. I followed the smoke like a starving man follows the smell of food. The last stretch of the climb was more a scramble than a walk. The path dwindled to a series of footholds, almost invisible unless you looked at them with the kind of attention born from desperation. When I pulled myself over the final ledge, my arms burning, I expected, though I would not have admitted it aloud, to see a warrior. In my mind, the old man of iron bones was enormous. Thick arms, massive shoulders, a barrel chest that could deflect blows. Someone you could imagine falling off a cliff and simply punching the ground in annoyance when he landed. What I found instead was a small, thin figure sitting cross-legged in front of a modest fire. He wore a faded gray robe patched at the elbows and knees. His hair, long and white, was tied back with a strip of cloth. His skin had the pale, translucent look of very old paper left too long in the sun. His hands rested loosely on his knees, the fingers knotted with age, but steady. For a long moment I thought I had made a mistake. This was some other hermit, I told myself. Some ordinary old man whose bones certainly creaked and ached and threatened betrayal with every step. Then he rose to his feet. He didn't push against his knees or lean on a staff. He simply unfolded upward, spine straight, movement smooth and unbroken, as if gravity were a suggestion and not a law. There was no cautious testing of balance, no protective stiffness, none of that fragile care I had seen in the elders of my village. The way they moved, as if any misstep could open a trapdoor beneath them. This man moved like water pouring from a jug, like wind changing direction, effortless. "Come closer," he said. His voice was neither weak nor booming, just clear, with a dry warmth to it, like sun on stone. I shuffled forward, suddenly aware of the way my right knee complained, of how my shoulders hunched from the weight of the pack. My whole body felt like a clumsy costume I didn't quite know how to wear. "You climbed well for someone who looks so breakable," he observed. I stopped. "You know about my bones?" He smiled, and the lines at the corners of his eyes deepened. "I know something about everyone's bones," he said. "I've been listening to them for more than 90 years. Sit, your legs are shaking." I sat, mostly because my legs obeyed him before they obeyed me. The fire between us crackled softly. Above, the sky stretched in a hard, clear blue that felt closer than it ever had in the valley. For a while, the old man said nothing. He watched the flame with the kind of attention my father had given his mortar and pestle. I watched him, looking for some clue, something that would explain what made him different. There was nothing obvious. That, perhaps, was the strangest thing. He was neither massive nor particularly muscular. If I had seen him walking in the village square, I would have thought of him as fragile. And yet, nothing about him felt fragile. "What brings you up here?" he asked at last, eyes still on the fire. "My father," I said. It was not the answer I had intended to give, but once the words were out, the rest tumbled after them, the fractures, the nickname, the way my father's own bone had betrayed him, the note about the old man of iron bones, the tavern keeper's directions, the climb. When I finished, the old man finally looked at me. His gaze was sharp but not unkind. "You came because you are afraid," he said. "Afraid of falling, afraid of breaking, afraid of ending up trapped in your own body like your father. I wanted to protest, to claim some nobler motive, but the truth sat heavily in my chest. Yes, I said, I am afraid. When I walk, I can feel the possibility of breaking in every step. I have lived more with caution than with courage. I don't want to spend the rest of my years negotiating with the ground. And you think I can give you different bones, he said. No. I swallowed. I think you can teach me how to make better use of the ones I have. That seemed to please him. The corner of his mouth lifted. A better answer than most, he said. Many come wanting miracles. They want to drink a tea, swallow a pill, recite a spell, and wake up with a new skeleton. They forget that the bones they already have are alive. He tapped his own chest lightly with 2 fingers. Alive, he repeated, responding to every choice you make, all day, every day. Something in the way he said it made the hairs on my arms stand up. In my village, I said, we are taught that bones are like stone. They grow while we are children, and after that, they simply wear out. He snorted softly. That is what the ignorant believe, he said. Bones are not dead pillars. They are a living conversation between you and the world. They remember. They adapt. They listen when you speak to them. I thought of my arm in splints, my ankle wrapped in cloth, my ribs bandaged tight. I had always thought of bones as things pain came from. I had never considered that they might be something I could speak to. How do you talk to bones? I asked, not quite able to keep the skepticism from my voice. He smiled, as if he had been waiting for that question. First, he said, you stay. That night I slept in a corner of his cave on a pile of dried grass and old blankets that smelled faintly of smoke and herbs. The stone floor was harder than the wooden pallet in my father's house. The mountain wind louder than the river outside our window had ever been. But for the first time since my father's death, I fell asleep without replaying the sound of his fall in my mind. I woke to the sound of striking, rhythmic, steady impacts, like hands clapping, but with a dry, resonant quality that suggested skin on bone. I sat up, heart already racing with the reflexive fear of impact, and stumbled outside. The old man stood in the pale light of dawn, robe sleeves rolled up to his elbows. With his right hand he was striking the inside of his left forearm, palm against bone, again and again. The blows were not gentle taps. They landed with a clear, hollow thud that echoed faintly off the cliff face. He moved methodically, from the forearms to the upper arms, from the shoulders to the chest, from the ribcage down to the thighs and shins. When he reached his back, he picked up a length of green bamboo leaning against the rock and used it to strike the areas his hands couldn't reach. Spine, shoulder blades, the back of the hips. I must have made some kind of sound, because he turned his head and saw me standing there, jaw slack. Good, he said. You're awake. Come closer. I obeyed, still half expecting to see bruises blooming under his skin. There were none. Only a faint pink flush where the blood had rushed to meet the blows. What are you doing? I asked. Talking to my bones, he said, as if it were obvious. He held out the bamboo rod. Have you never seen this kind of practice? I shook my head. In my village. If someone struck himself like that every morning, I said, we would assume he had lost his sanity. The old man chuckled. Most people confuse comfort with sanity, he said. They think avoiding all discomfort will keep them safe. In truth, it makes them weaker. Let me show you. He handed me the bamboo. I took it gingerly, feeling the cool smoothness under my fingers. Start with your arms, he instructed. Palm to bone. Not hard enough to injure. Just enough that the bone notices. I raised my right hand and hesitated. My body flinched in anticipation of pain before my palm even made contact. Afraid? He asked. Wouldn't you be, if your bones break as easily as mine? I muttered. He stepped closer, his eyes very calm. You have spent your whole life being broken by accidents, he said. Now you will learn how to be strengthened by intention. There is a difference between a blow that surprises the body and one the body is invited to receive. Strike. I took a breath and did as he said. The first impact sent a shock up my arm that made my teeth click. It wasn't unbearable, but it was sharp, a reminder that there was not much meat between my skin and the rigid structure beneath. Again, he said. I hit myself along the ulna, down the radius, awkward and tense. Loosen your shoulders, he said, circling me. You're hitting yourself like a man who expects to be punished. This is not punishment. This is a conversation. The word lodged in my mind, conversation, as if each impact were a word, each series of strikes a sentence. Bones are alive, he said, tapping his own sternum with a knuckle. Inside them, cells are building and dismantling, responding to every load you place on them. If you ask nothing of them, they become lazy, they thin, they hollow. If you ask of them wisely, they thicken, they grow strong. You don't strengthen a bridge by never crossing it. You strengthen it by using it, by letting weight pass through it, so long as you do not overload it. He demonstrated again on his own arm. The sound of his strikes was different than mine, more solid, less hollow. When you strike, he said, you are telling the bone, I need you to be strong here. The bone listens. Over time, it responds. Western doctors have their own words for this. Density, remodeling. But they do not live with their bones, so they do not understand the relationship as we do. I kept hitting. After a few minutes, my skin reddened. My muscles protested. A dull ache began to spread under the surface, not localized to a single spot, but along the whole length of the bone. You will be sore at first, he said, as if reading my thoughts. This is natural. The bones are waking up. They are not used to being addressed directly. Waking up, I repeated, tasting the phrase. He nodded. Most people go from birth to death with their bones half asleep, he said. They wake them only when something crashes into them, and by then it is too late. We do the opposite. We wake them before the world does. He had me continue down my arms, then along my thighs and shins. When it was time to reach my back, he showed me how to use the bamboo rod. Hold it with both hands, swing it over the shoulder, let it fall against the muscles along the spine. The first time I did it, the rod slipped and clipped my spine directly. I winced. Careful, he said. We are not trying to damage what is already weak. We are trying to alert it, learn the line between too little and too much. That line is where true training lives. By the time he finally motioned for me to stop, my entire body buzzed. My skin felt hot, my muscles tender, and yet there was something else underneath, a strange, compact solidity, as if the bones inside me were heavier, more present. Sit, he said, gesturing toward a flat rock. Notice. I closed my eyes because it felt easier to pay attention that way. Without sight, the sensations rose like fish to the surface of a lake. My forearms felt thicker. My shins, usually just narrow sticks that had broken on small stones, now pulsed with a faint, warm insistence. There was no single point of pain, just a generalized awareness I had never felt before. I feel denser, I said slowly, searching for the right word, as if the bones were humming. The old man smiled. Good, he said. That is the beginning. They have heard you knock. He crouched by the fire, which had burned down to coals, and put a small iron pot on the rack above them. From a clay jar, he scooped a handful of tiny black seeds and let them rain into the water. They sank like specks of night. What is that? I asked. Breakfast, he said. For you. For your marrow. The porridge he served me a little while later was simple. Rice, a few shredded roots, and those black seeds softened and swollen by the boil. They stained the water a faint gray. like ink washed from a brush. He watched me closely as I ate. "Do you know what these are?" he asked. I rolled one on my tongue, then bit it. It released a rich, nutty taste that reminded me of autumn. "Sesame," I guessed. "Black sesame," he nodded. "Black sesame is food for the marrow," he said. "And marrow is the mother of the bones. People think bones are made of stone. In truth, they are made from what the marrow gives them. If you nourish the marrow, you nourish every bone in your body from the inside out." I thought of all the times my father had told patients to drink bone broth, to eat gelatinous soups. I thought of how rarely he had applied that advice to himself. "And the color?" I asked, remembering half-heard lessons at my father's knee about correspondences and elements. "Black for the kidneys?" "Ah," the old man said, pleased. "So you are not entirely ignorant?" "Yes. In our tradition, black belongs to the kidneys, and the kidneys govern the bones. Sesame warms and lubricates. It supports the yin, the deep essence that feeds marrow and bone alike." I looked into my bowl. The black seeds looked insignificant, almost like dirt. "I thought something this important would be rarer," I admitted. "More exotic, more expensive." He shrugged. "Truth is often cheap," he said. "It is ignorance that is expensive. The monks I know who care about their bones eat black sesame every day of their lives. They do not miss a day, not because it is magical, but because it is consistent. You cannot build a house by placing one brick and waiting a year. You place a brick every day. This," he tapped the rim of my bowl, "is one brick." I chewed slowly, suddenly aware of each bite as a decision. "So that is all?" I asked. "Hit my bones in the morning, eat sesame at night, and my skeleton becomes unbreakable." He laughed, the sound bouncing softly off the stone walls of the cave. "If only it were that easy," he said. "What you learned this morning is the first of many lessons. You have knocked on the door of your bones and offered them one kind of fuel. Why? In the months and years to come, if you stay, you will learn how the kidneys feed the bones, how breath can reach the marrow, how fear can hollow the skeleton from the inside out, how sleep builds what the day tears down." He looked at me over the rim of his own bowl, his eyes suddenly very serious. "But remember this," he added. "Everything begins with the foundation. Your father was not wrong when he said that a life built on weak bones is a life built on unstable ground. You have come here because your bones have betrayed you. In time you will see that they have only been following the instructions you gave them. Avoid stress, avoid load, avoid risk. They obeyed. They thinned." He set his bowl aside and tapped the rock floor with one knuckle. "From today," he said, "we give them new instructions." "Which are?" I asked. He smiled again, that small, almost secret smile I would come to recognize over the years as the expression he wore whenever he was about to hand me something simple that would change everything. "Grow dense," he said. "Grow strong. Remember why you exist." Outside, the mountain wind rose, carrying with it the thin, high cry of some unseen bird. Inside the cave, my bones sat quietly beneath skin and muscle, listening. For the first time in my life, I realized I might not be their victim. I might be their teacher. 3 moons passed before my teacher decided I was ready for the next lesson. In that time, my life became simple in a way it had never been in the valley. No patients, no ledger books, no village gossip, only the mountain, my teacher, the small cave we slept in, and the stubborn, quiet work of awakening bones. Every morning, as soon as the first gray light crawled over the ridge, we stood in the clearing outside the cave and began our striking. Forearms, upper arms, chest, ribs, thighs, shins, back. The first week, my skin burned and bloomed with bruises the color of plums. My bones throbbed with a deep, unfamiliar ache. Each night I lay on my bed of blankets convinced I had finally gone too far, that in trying to strengthen what was fragile, I had simply broken it in a new way. But every morning I could still stand. Every morning. The old man looked me over with those steady eyes and said, "Continue." The bruises faded faster than bruises usually did. The ache changed from something sharp and resentful into something else, something I came to think of as presence. It was as if my bones, which had spent 19 years hiding from impact, were finally clearing their throats and saying, "Fine, we're here. Now what?" Every evening there was sesame, sometimes in porridge, sometimes ground into a paste and stirred into broth, sometimes dry roasted and tossed with a little salt. At first I ate it because he told me to. After a few weeks, my body started asking for it before my mind remembered why. One night, as I was scraping the bottom of my bowl with my thumb, catching every last seed, my teacher watched me with an amused tilt to his head. "Do you feel the difference?" he asked. "I think so," I said slowly. "My legs feel more solid. When I walk, it's like the ground and my bones are on better terms. My knees don't complain as much. And when I hit my shins in the morning," I hesitated, surprised by my own words. "They don't feel like they're going to snap." He nodded, satisfied, but his expression held no triumph. "What you feel now is only the doorway," he said. "You have knocked and the bones have answered, but a house is not held up by its door alone. There are deeper beams, deeper pillars. You must learn where the real foundations lie, or one day you will still find the roof collapsing on your head." I thought awakening the bones was the foundation. It turned out I had only been playing on the surface. The next afternoon he told me to bring a torch. We climbed a path I had not noticed before, a narrow crack between two slabs of rock just wide enough to slip through sideways. The air grew cooler as we walked, and a kind of stillness settled around us, the way water grows still when you go deep enough. At the end of the passage, the mountain opened into a cave. At first, all I saw was darkness. Then, as my eyes adjusted to the wavering light of the torch, I realized the walls were lined with shelves carved directly into the stone. On every shelf lay bones, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Skulls and femurs and ribs and vertebrae, arranged not as trophies but as if they were books in a library, sorted by size and shape, placed with care. I stepped closer without thinking, then stopped. It felt wrong to be loud in that place, even with my breath. "What is this?" I whispered. "This," my teacher said softly, "is what remains when everything else is gone." He walked among the shelves with the familiarity of someone strolling through an old friend's house, his fingers occasionally brushing a rib, a jawbone, a curve of pelvis. "These came from animals the hunters brought me over the years," he explained. "Goats, deer, wild pigs, a few birds. When they brought me meat, I kept the bones. They rotted, the flesh left, and this is what stayed." He stopped at one shelf and picked up a long bone, turning it in the torchlight. "This was a deer," he said. "Strong, fast, leaping over ravines like a brush of wind. Now all that running is a memory held only in this." He held the bone out to me. "Break it," he said. I stared at him. "What?" "Break it," he repeated. "It is long dead. You will not hurt it." I wrapped both hands around it and pulled. It did not give. I pressed the end of it against the shelf, testing for weak points. The bone was dry, lighter than it looked, but still stubbornly whole. "No?" he asked. "Harder." I tried again, this time with all the leverage I could muster. My palms began to sweat. My arms trembled. Finally, there was a sharp crack and the deer bone split in two. "Look," he said. Inside, the marrow had long since dried and shrunk, but I could see the hollow channel where it had once lived, stretching the length of the bone like a tunnel. "The outside is what the world sees," he said, pointing to the broken shaft, "but the inside is where the real story happens. Flesh comes and goes. Even the outer surface of the bone changes. But marrow is where blood is born, where the deepest essence is stored. He tapped the hollow gently with one finger. In our tradition, we call that essence Jing, he said. You might translate it as vital essence or ancestral energy, but all such words are clumsy. It is the inheritance you receive from your parents and their parents before them, a reserve you do not refill easily. He set the broken pieces of bone back on the shelf. The kidneys store this essence, he went on. The kidneys govern the bones. Western doctors may talk about calcium and vitamin D and obsess over what floats in the blood, but they rarely ask what governs the blood's maker. He looked at me. You told me once you felt afraid every time you walked, he said. You think that fear lives in your thoughts, but it also lives here. He touched the area of his lower back, where the kidneys sit hidden behind muscle and fat. A frightened life drains this place drop by drop until the marrow has nothing left to work with. Then the bones follow. I took a breath, suddenly aware of an old tightness in that area. Something I had always blamed on bad posture, on sleeping wrong, on anything but fear. So if the kidneys are weak, I said slowly, the bones are weak. Exactly, he said. You can bang on your bones all day and eat all the sesame in the world. But if you ignore the springs that feed the marrow, you are like a man pouring water into a bucket full of holes. He turned and began walking deeper into the cave. I followed, the torchlight throwing monstrous shadows of the bones on the walls. How do I strengthen my kidneys? I asked. He stopped at the far wall, where the ceiling dipped low. There are 3 paths, he said. Heat, food, stillness. Each helps the others. Neglect one, and the rest limp along. That night he showed me the path of heat. We sat by the small fire at the cave mouth. The air had a mountain chill that crept easily into hands and feet. My teacher asked me to hold out my palms, then rubbed his own together briskly until they burned. He pressed them against my lower back, just above the waistline. Fingers spread wide. The heat seeped in slowly, deeper than the warmth of the fire, deeper than the warmth of wool. It felt as if his hands were telling some braced, shivering part of me that it could finally relax. The kidneys fear cold, he said. Most people go through life letting drafts hit their lower back, letting damp creep into their bones through thin shoes on wet ground. They call it getting old when their joints ache in winter, when their lower back feels like a slab of ice. In truth, they have been inviting the enemy in for years. He took his hands away and motioned for me to do as he had done. I rubbed my own palms. At first, they were merely warm, then warmer, then almost hot. I pressed them to my own back in the same place. It was different from when he had done it. The heat wasn't as deep, but it was mine. Every night before you sleep, he said, you will do this. Rub your hands until they are hot, then rest them over your kidneys until the heat sinks in. It is a small thing. It takes no more than a few breaths. But small heat given every night is better than a raging fire once a year. Will this alone make my bones stronger? I asked. He smiled faintly. If you warmed a frozen spring every evening, would the stream that comes from it not eventually flow more freely? He said. Do not underestimate simple things done faithfully. The world is full of people who seek complicated cures and ignore the matches in their own pockets. The path of food was the one I thought I already understood. My father taught me which foods are rich in minerals, I said the next day as we sorted dried ingredients in the cave. Bones, tendons, certain kinds of beans. Yes, my teacher said, your father knew his craft, but most people think only in terms of parts. This food has iron. That food has calcium. Without understanding that the body does not read labels, it reads patterns. He held up a walnut. What does this look like? He asked. A brain, I said. So, good for the brain. Exactly, he said, pleased. Nature marks many of its medicines with shapes and colors, not as a joke, but as a language. kidney-shaped beans for kidneys, dark foods for the water element and the deep places it governs, bones of animals to feed the bones of humans. Our ancestors discovered this not by magic but by observation over lifetimes. He poured a handful of black beans into my palm, their glossy surfaces shining in the light. "These," he said, "fortify the kidneys. Eat them often. Black sesame, you know already. Seaweed, when we can get it from traders, goes to the same places. And bone broth." He looked at me to see if I would finish the sentence. "Feeds the bones," I said, "like nourishes like." He nodded. "When you simmer bones for many hours, the water pulls out minerals and compounds the body recognizes as building blocks. The broth becomes a message as much as a meal. Here, use this. There is a reason our elders boiled bones instead of throwing them away. They may not have known the names of the substances, but they knew how they felt after drinking them." We spent that afternoon preparing a broth. He had a small stash of goat bones from a hunter's last visit. We cracked them with a well-placed blow of a hammer, exposing the marrow, then put them in a pot with water, a splash of rice wine, ginger, and a bundle of dried herbs. As the concoction simmered over low heat, the cave filled with a smell that was both comforting and primal, something that made my stomach growl and my bones sit up a little straighter. "When you live on the mountain," he said, "you cannot afford to waste anything that feeds the structure that carries you. Remember that. Every time you are tempted to throw away a bone, remember, you are throwing away a chance to speak to your own skeleton in its native tongue." The third path, stillness, was the one that almost drove me away. "Sit," he said the following morning. Instead of handing me the bamboo rod, we sat facing each other near the cave entrance. The valley spread out far below like a faded painting. He crossed his legs. I mimicked him, my hips already protesting. "Straighten your back," he said. Not like a soldier straining, but like a tree growing. Chin tucked a little. Imagine a string lifting the crown of your head. I adjusted, feeling my muscles tense. "Now breathe," he said. "In through the nose. Let the breath sink low, all the way to the lower belly. This place we call the dantian, the field of elixir. When you inhale, feel as if that field is filling. When you exhale, feel as if it settles and condenses there." It sounded simple enough, but within minutes my back was on fire, my knees ached, and my thoughts were racing so fast they might as well have been chasing each other around the entire mountain. "I don't think I'm very good at this," I muttered after what felt like an hour. "It has been 6 minutes," he said dryly. "Of course you're not good. You've spent your life running from your own mind. Sitting still with it will feel like locking yourself in a room with a stranger you don't like." He closed his eyes again. "Continue." I tried. I really did. For days I sat each morning, counting breaths, cursing the way my thoughts refused to behave. Worries I thought I had forgotten bubbled up. Regrets, fantasy, remembered arguments. All of them lined up to parade through my awareness as soon as I asked it to be still. Strangely, beneath the restlessness, I began to feel something else, a warmth gathering in my lower abdomen, a subtle heaviness that was not unpleasant. When I told him this on the 5th day, he nodded. "The yin is beginning to wake," he said. "You keep saying that word," I said. "Yin. In my father's books, it meant the dark, the moon, the hidden aspect of things." "All true," he said. "But in the body, yin is also the substantial. The fluids, the marrow, the essence stored in the kidneys. It is what you live on when the world demands more of you than your food and air can supply. Most people spend their yin as if it were infinite. Long nights, constant worry, too much sex, too little rest. By the time they notice the cost, their hair is gray and their bones are hollow." He gestured toward my belly. "This practice," he said, "is one of the few ways we know to quietly return something to that account. To condense, to store, to rebuild. You won't see the result in a day or a week, but in 10 years you will know whether you did it or not. 10 years. When he spoke, time stretched differently. My life up to that point, 19 years, suddenly felt like a hasty introduction rather than the whole story. "Do you expect me to stay that long?" I asked. He shrugged. "I expect nothing," he said. "Expectation is for merchants and matchmakers. I offer you methods. Whether you use them is yours to decide. But I will tell you this. The monks who sit like this every day into old age have bones that surprise even modern physicians when they look at them with their machines. Dense, clear, young. The outer flesh wrinkles, yes, but the inner scaffolding remains strong. I thought of my father's bones crumbling under him at 50. The idea of carrying a different kind of skeleton into my own old age suddenly seemed like a very good bargain for the price of a few stubborn minutes each morning. "All right," I said. "I'll keep sitting." He closed his eyes again. "Then sit," he said. "And when you want to run, notice which part of you is doing the wanting. Often it is not the bones." It was several weeks later that he showed me the herbs. We had already walked the 3 paths: heat, food, stillness. Long enough that the routines had started to stitch themselves into the fabric of my days. My lower back stayed warm even when the wind was sharp. My belly kept its quiet ember from the breathing practice. The broth and beans and sesame had become familiar friends. One cool afternoon, he appeared at the cave entrance with a woven basket and said, "Come." We climbed higher than we usually did. The air thinned and grew brighter, the way it does above the layer of ordinary weather. Small, tough plants clung to cracks in the stone, leaves pressed low to the ground. He stopped before a tree I might have walked past without seeing twice. Its leaves were thick and dark, its trunk unremarkable except for the bark, which had a faint, rubbery look. He took a knife from his sleeve and carefully cut a strip of bark, peeling it away from the trunk with more tenderness than I had ever seen him give a human. "Look," he said. He bent the strip of bark until it split. Between the 2 halves, thin white fibers stretched like strands of silk, refusing to let go even as the bark pulled apart. They looked exactly like the tiny cords my father had once shown me on the back of my own hand when I was a child. "These are tendons," he had said, "the ropes that let your muscles move the bones." I stared at the fibers, at the way they held, at the way they mirrored the body's own connectors. "What does it remind you of?" my teacher asked. "Tendons," I said immediately. "Ligaments." "Exactly," he said. "This is duzhong, eukamia. It has been used for centuries to strengthen the belts and cables of the body. Tendons, ligaments, the lower back. The tree tells you what it does if you know how to look. The bark holds itself together with fibers, so it helps you hold yourself together, too." He placed the bark gently into the basket. Further up, we came to a plant that seemed more root than anything else. It grew out of a crack in the sheer rock face, its woody stems clutching the stone as if refusing to be separated. My teacher dug around its base, exposing more of its roots. They clung to the rock with a tenacity that made my own fingers ache in sympathy just watching. "This one," he said, "is Gu Sui Bu, mender of shattered bones. See how it grips the stone? It knows how to hold on where others break and fall. When bone has already broken, we give this to help it reknit. When bone has not yet broken, we give it to teach the skeleton what it means to resist." He cut a portion of the root and added it to the basket. Its smell was sharp, almost animal. "The old masters didn't discover these herbs in a dream," he said as we descended. They watched. They saw that plants have their own bones and tendons. The structures that let them stand, that let them cling. They saw which plants survived storms and which snapped in the first wind. Then they tried them on the body. Over generations, patterns emerged. Back in the cave, He opened a small ceramic jar I had seen many times but had never seen him touch. Inside lay knotted dark roots, sliced and dried. "This," he said, "does not grow on this mountain. Traders brought it long ago. It is called He Shu Wu." I recognized the name from my father's book. There was a story attached to it about an old man whose gray hair turned black again after he ate it for years. "You take it for your hair?" I asked. My teacher laughed. "I couldn't care less what color my hair is," he said. Vanity is a poor reason to bother a plant. I use it because it nourishes the yin. The deep essence we spoke of, it feeds the kidneys, and when the kidneys are strong, the bones have a richer spring to drink from. He spent the rest of the afternoon combining the three: Duzhong for the tendons and ligaments, Gu Sui Bu for the bones themselves, He Shu Wu for the essence underneath it all. He measured each portion with a precision that suggested this was more ceremony than recipe. "Some herbs you can be casual with," he said. "These are not among them. Too little and you waste their potential. Too much and you can choke the very system you are trying to nourish." He simmered them in a clay pot for an hour, the steam filling the cave with a bitter, earthy smell that made my mouth water and my stomach flinch at the same time. "Drink," he said, handing me a bowl of the dark liquid. It was as bitter as I had expected, the kind of bitterness that didn't just sit on the tongue but seemed to ring through the bones like a struck bell. I made a face. He watched without sympathy. "Your bones have been complaining for years," he said. "The least you can do is listen to theirs for a moment." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Plants have their own stories," he said. "Duzhong spent its life holding itself together. Gu Sui Bu spent its life clinging to bare stone. He Shu Wu stored up richness in its root year after year. When you drink them, you are not just taking in compounds. You are taking in those stories. Over time, your bones remember them." I finished the bowl. The bitterness lingered. Underneath it, though, there was a sense of something dense settling into me, like a stone dropping to the bottom of a pool. How often will I drink this?" I asked, secretly hoping he would say once. 2 or 3 times a week, he said. "Not every day. These are strong allies. You do not shout your requests at such friends. You ask, then give them time to answer." In the months that followed, I did as he said. I struck my bones every morning. I warmed my kidneys every night. I ate sesame and beans and bone broth whenever we could manage it. I sat in stillness and watched my mind thrash, then settle, then thrash again. Twice a week, sometimes 3 times when the wind had a certain bite to it. We brewed the bitter formula. Change did not arrive with trumpets. There was no morning when I woke up and shouted, "My bones are new." Instead, small things shifted. The ache in my knees that had been my shadow since I was a child grew quieter. The stairs carved into the rock near the cave, which had once made my legs tremble, became ordinary. I could carry more firewood without feeling as if my spine were a stack of unstable plates. My fear of falling never vanished entirely. It would be a long time before any slick patch of stone did not make my heart accelerate. But it no longer rode on my shoulders every second of the day. Sometimes I would realize, halfway through a steep climb, that for the last dozen steps I had simply walked. My teacher watched all this with the unexcited satisfaction of a farmer watching seedlings grow. He rarely said good or bad. He just observed and occasionally nudged. "You are beginning to learn what to do," he said one evening, as we shared a bowl of broth thick with softened cartilage. "Now you must learn what not to do." I assumed he meant technical mistakes. Postures, doses, timing. I was wrong. For several weeks, he taught me nothing new. We went on with our routines. He watched me grind grains, cook, carry water, gather fallen branches. When we traded dried herbs with the hunters, he watched what I chose from their packs. At night, he watched how quickly I emptied the small jar of rock sugar he kept for guests. It was unnerving, having my habits examined like a patient's pulse. At first I tried to hide the worst of them, the extra pinch of salt in my porridge, the third bowl of meat stew on days when the hunters had been generous. But hiding things from a man who had spent 100 years watching human beings was like trying to conceal a bonfire behind a single leaf. One cold, clear night, we sat by the fire. The stars crowded above us like witnesses. My teacher held a small stick in his hands and turned it slowly in the flames, not quite burning it, not quite letting it escape the heat. "You have spent months learning what builds bones," he said finally, without looking at me. "Now it is time to learn what steals from them." He took the stick out of the fire and let the embers die one by one along its length. "It is useless to build with one hand if you are tearing down with the other," he said. "And most people do exactly that every day without knowing it." He held up one finger. "First thief," he said. "Sugar." I frowned. "You mean sweets?" "I mean the concentrated white crystals merchants boast of," he said. "The reward people add to their tea, the luxury they serve at celebrations to show they are not poor anymore. The tongue loves it. The bones do not." He tossed a pinch of sand into the fire. The coals hissed. "When you eat a lot of sugar," he continued, "your body must get it out of the blood quickly. To do this, it uses minerals as part of the process. Calcium, magnesium, others with names you know. If it does not have enough available in the blood, it goes to the storage house." "And where is that?" He tapped his shin. "The bones," I said. "Exactly. You eat something sweet. The body steals from your skeleton to pay for it. Not once, but over and over. Do you feel it? No. Do you hear your bones complaining? No. But one day you fall, and they break more easily than they should, and you blame the fall." I thought of my childhood in the valley, of the candied hawthorn sticks at the market, glistening red, of my mother slipping a lump of sugar into my tea on winter mornings to make you strong. Each piece had tasted like love. I had never imagined it might also carry a quiet cost. He raised a second finger. "Second thief, too much salt." "Salt weakens bones?" I asked. "I thought we needed it." "In small amounts, yes," he said, "but modern people." He waved toward the vague direction of the world below. "Have learned to drown their food in it. They pickle, they preserve, they hide bad flavors behind it. The kidneys must work harder to flush the excess, work and work, day after day, until they tire. And when the kidneys tire, what do the bones lose? Their governor," I said, remembering his words in the bone cave. He nodded. "Think of the kidneys as the officials, overseeing a great construction project," he said. "If you whip them all day with salt and never let them rest, eventually they make mistakes. Walls are built thinner, foundations are skipped. The building still stands, until a strong wind comes." He lifted a third finger. "Third thief, too much meat." I blinked. "But meat makes you strong," I said. "Everyone says so." He gave me a long, patient look. "Meat has its place," he agreed. "It can be a good source of strength when used wisely. But when people eat it morning, noon, and night, their bodies become too acidic. To neutralize that, the body again reaches into its mineral stores. Once more, the bones pay." He leaned forward. "I have seen monks who eat meat only on special days, whose bones are hard as temple pillars. And I have seen rich merchants who demand meat at every meal, whose bones crumble like dry tofu when they fall. It is not the meat that is the problem. It is the imbalance." He extended a fourth finger. "Fourth thief, stillness. Not the stillness of meditation," he added, "but the stillness of neglect. The kind where people sit all day, lie all day, move only when forced. Bones," he said, "need load. They need pressure, impact, the pull of muscle on tendon on bone. Without it, they think, 'Ah, I am not needed here. I can thin, I can lighten. The body is efficient. It will not maintain what you never use. He poked the ground with the stick, leaving a small dent. I have seen people who lay in bed for months from illness, he said. When they finally stood up, it was as if their skeleton had aged years, not because of time, but because of disuse. Bones are like relationships. Ignore them, and they weaken even if you never openly attack them. He held up his thumb last. Fifth thief, he said quietly. Fear. I waited for him to elaborate. He didn't, at least not right away. He stared into the fire for so long I began to think he had forgotten I was there. In our medicine, he said finally, every organ is tied to an emotion. The liver to anger, the lungs to grief, the heart to joy. The kidneys are tied to fear, not the sharp fear that makes you jump away from a snake. That is healthy. I mean the low, constant fear, the worry that gnaws, the feeling of never being safe. He looked at me then, and I had the uncomfortable sensation that he could see more than my face. A life soaked in that kind of fear drains the kidneys silently, he said. Years of what if this and what if that, and I must control everything or it will all collapse. And eventually, something does collapse. Usually, the bones. I thought of all the times I had walked across a room calculating every possible way to fall, of the nights lying awake, replaying my father's accident over and over, imagining my own version of it, of the way my stomach had clenched every time I stepped onto a wet stone. What if I've already done too much damage? I asked before I could stop myself. What if my kidneys are already empty? He shook his head. The body is forgiving, he said. Remarkably so. It will begin rebuilding as soon as you stop tearing down faster than it can build. But it needs your cooperation. You cannot keep feeding the thieves and then weep when you find the house bare. He leaned back, letting the stick rest on his knees. So, he said, what will you do, knowing this? I stared into the fire, watching a coal collapse into fine, glowing ash. I thought of sugarcane juice on hot market days, the comfortable habit of grabbing the salt jar whenever food tasted bland, the way I'd always reached for the largest piece of meat in the pot, as if size alone could fill what felt empty inside. The afternoons I'd spent lying on my back staring at the ceiling instead of walking, because walking meant risking another fall. The fear, always the fear, humming in the background like a second heartbeat. I will close the doors, I said quietly. What doors? He asked. The ones I've been leaving open, I said. In my mouth, in my feet, in my mind. He nodded, and for the first time since I had climbed onto his mountain, there was unmistakable approval in his eyes. Good, he said. Remember, building is slow, destruction is fast. You will be tempted, one day, to think nothing is happening and reach for old comforts. The bones keep their own ledger. They remember every debt and every deposit. He stirred the coals with the stick, sending up a small cloud of sparks that vanished into the night. From tomorrow, he said, we will begin the next lesson, how to make your bones carry weight the way they were meant to. I didn't know what that meant yet. I only knew that as I lay down to sleep that night, my sweet tooth a little sulky, my tongue still tasting the salt of old habits. There was a feeling in my body I had not known before. It was not total safety. It was not the absence of fear. It was the faint, unfamiliar sense that my bones were no longer just waiting to break. They were listening. And somewhere deep in the dark, in the caves of my kidneys and the quiet chambers of my marrow, something was beginning to answer. The next morning, my teacher did not hand me the bamboo rod. Instead, after we finished our bowls of hot millet and sesame, he stepped out into the clearing in front of the cave and simply stood there, looking out over the valley. The sky was a flat, pale blue. The mountains across from us were still half drowned in a sea of cloud. Come here, he said. I walked over, expecting him to correct my posture as he had done during meditation. He did not. He only spread his feet a little wider than shoulder width and let his arms hang loosely at his sides. "Today," he said, "you will learn the oldest and most powerful practice for bones. No herbs, no fancy movements, just this." "Just standing?" I asked. "Just standing," he repeated. "If you do it correctly, you will not need much else. If you cannot do it, no amount of other training will fully make up for it." He shifted his weight slightly, settling himself. Nothing about his stance looked dramatic, but there was a quiet rightness to it, as if he had become another piece of the mountain. "Feet parallel," he said, "about as wide as your shoulders. Toes pointing straight ahead, not turned out like a duck. Knees soft. Not locked back, but not collapsed either. Imagine you are sitting on a very high stool that someone has just taken away. You are suspended between sitting and standing." I tried to imitate him. Immediately my thighs complained. "Pelvis tucked slightly," he went on, paying no attention to my discomfort. "Not arched like a proud horse, not tucked so far your tail disappears. Just enough to let your lower back lengthen. Lift the crown of your head as if a thread were attached to it, and the sky were gently pulling it upward. Chin slightly in, shoulders loose, chest relaxed, not puffed." He walked around me, nudging an elbow here, a knee there, tilting my head the smallest fraction. "Do you feel how the weight drops straight down through you now?" he asked. "Not pushed into your knees, not hanging in your lower back. It goes through the bones, into the earth." I did feel something. I wasn't sure I liked it. It was as if my skeleton had suddenly become a series of connected poles, and my flesh was just cloth draped over them. "What do I do with my hands?" I asked. "For now, nothing," he said. "Let them hang. Later, there will be other positions. Today, you learn to stand with nothing to distract you." He stepped back and regarded me. "Now," he said, "do not move." "For how long?" I asked. He smiled. "For as long as you can without collapsing, complaining, or pretending." That, I would learn, was his way of saying, longer than you think you can. The first few minutes were easy. Then my thighs began to burn. A slow, insistent heat crept into the muscles above my knees. My calves quivered, my lower back, still weak from years of poor posture, started sending sharp little signals to my brain. "I don't like this. Stop." I shifted my weight slightly to relieve the discomfort. "Do not fidget," he said instantly, as if he had eyes in every direction. "Stillness is part of the work. If you rearrange yourself every time you feel something, the bones never receive a clear message." "My legs are shaking," I said through clenched teeth. "Of course they are," he said. "You are asking them to carry you in a way they are not used to. Let them shake. Shaking is not failure. Collapse is failure. Do not collapse." So I did not collapse. I wanted to. After what felt like half an hour, my body seemed to be made of fire from the waist down and stone from the waist up. Sweat trickled down my spine even though the mountain air was cool. "How long has it been?" I gasped. 8 minutes, he said. 8 minutes. If he had told me an hour, I would have believed him. Something in me rebelled. All my life, movement had been my enemy. I avoided jumping, running, anything that seemed like it might jar my fragile skeleton. Now I was being asked to hold still, and it felt harder than any sprint. "I thought bones needed impact," I managed. "We hit them every morning. How does standing help?" He waited a moment before answering, perhaps to make sure I was not looking for an excuse to move. "Wah. Impact is one kind of message," he said. "Weight is another. When you stand like this, with the alignment correct, you send a continuous, gentle reminder through every bone from your feet to your skull. This is your job. Support, transmit, bear." The bones respond by becoming denser along the lines of force. They adapt to the load you place on them. He walked behind me and tapped the side of my thigh lightly. Most people live their lives with this load dumped into their joints and muscles because they stand poorly. he said. Locked knees, sway back, head forward. They tire quickly, their joints wear out, and their bones receive no clear signal. This is why standing correctly is both simple and rare. My legs started to tremble so hard my teeth rattled. I can't, I said. You can, he said. You just don't want to. There is a difference. You are used to obeying the part of you that wants comfort. Right now, you will obey the part of you that wants strength. Somewhere under the burning, under the shaking, I felt something stubborn stir. I stayed. At some point, the sensation in my legs changed. It stopped being just pain and became something like depth, as if instead of standing on my feet, I were standing on pillars that sank far into the ground. Good, he said quietly. Now your bones have begun to pay attention. When he finally told me to relax, I almost fell over. My legs had become untrustworthy, made of cotton and water. I sat down hard on the rock and sucked air as if I'd been running. How long? I asked, dreading the answer. 17 minutes, he said. Not bad for the first day. Not bad, I wheezed. He laughed. One day you will pass an hour without thinking about it, he said. Today you learned that 17 minutes can feel like a war. Both are true. He sat down beside me, his own breathing steady, his legs not shaking at all. Understand this, he said. Bones respond to demands. No demand, no change. Too much demand. They break. Proper demand. Repeated over time. They transform. This practice, standing like a tree, is the art of asking just enough, for just long enough, over and over, until your skeleton remembers what it was made to do. He looked out over the valley. Modern people sit all day and call it rest, he added. They rest themselves into weakness. You will stand yourself into strength. We practiced standing every day after that. Some mornings it came easier. Some mornings my legs shook from the first minute. On days when my mind was noisy, the posture felt like a prison. On days when my mind was quiet, it felt like a kind of home. We added variations. Sometimes he had me lift my arms as if holding a large ball in front of my chest, elbows rounded, fingers relaxed. Imagine you are embracing a tree, he said. Not a small sapling, but a great trunk. Let the arms hold the space without collapsing into it. This, unbelievably, was harder than standing with my arms down. The added weight of my own limbs turned the burning in my shoulders into a steady roar. Why the arms? I asked once, after my hands had fallen to my sides of their own accord for the third time. The arms are just another way to teach the same thing, he said. Support, structure, endurance. If you can hold an invisible tree without sagging, you can hold your own life with more stability. Bones are not only in the legs, they are in the shoulders, the ribs, the spine. All must learn. Slowly, my time increased, and 20 minutes, and 25. On the day I passed 30, the sky had turned pink and gold, and I realized after we finished that I had gone several minutes without thinking about my legs at all. My attention had drifted to my breath, to the distant shapes of birds circling below us, to the smell of pine resin warming in the sun. That, he said, is a good sign. When the body can work and the mind can observe without arguing every second, training becomes possible. I asked him one day, when curiosity finally outweighed exhaustion, how long he had been doing this practice. Since I was younger than you, he said. Every day? I asked. Every day I had a body, he said. Some days it was 10 minutes. Some days it was 2 hours. I stood in temples, in city courtyards, on ships, in caves like this. There were years when life pulled me away, when I let the practice shrink. My bones always told me when it was time to return. Don't you ever get bored? I asked. He turned his head and looked at me as if I had asked whether he ever got bored of breathing. Why would I be bored? He said. Every day is different. Some mornings my knees complain and I listen. Some mornings my hips speak, some mornings my thoughts scream like monkeys and I watch them tire. The mountain wind is never the same. The light is never the same. This, he tapped his sternum, is never exactly the same. Boredom is what happens when you stop paying attention. Standing like this is the opposite of that. One evening, as we sat by the fire rubbing heat into our lower backs, he asked me a question that seemed, at first, unrelated. When you breathe, he said, how far does your breath go? I frowned. To the lungs, I said. Where else could it go? He smiled a little, the way he did when he heard an answer that was not wrong but not complete. That is where the air goes, he said. I did not ask about the air. I asked about the breath. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. For a man who struck himself with sticks and ate bitter roots, he could be annoyingly poetic. What's the difference? I asked. He picked up a small stick and drew a rough outline of a human body in the dust between us. Air is physical, he said. It goes in, it goes out. It carries oxygen, which your body uses in many ways. Breath is air plus something else. Call it qi if you like, or call it attention. It is the part of breathing you can direct. The part that changes when you are calm or terrified or excited, even if the amount of air doesn't change much. He shaded in the chest of the drawing, then the belly, then the legs. Most people breathe like frightened birds, he said. Shallow, quick, all up here. He tapped his own upper chest. Their bellies are tight, their backs are stiff, their breath never visits the deep places. He tapped the lower back of the drawing. But the deep places, he said, are where the kidneys live, where the dantian sits, where the marrow waits for whatever they can get. If your breath never sends attention there, those places are like rooms in a house forever kept in the dark. And bones need attention from the breath? I asked skeptically. Bones need blood and nutrients and the subtle movement of fluid that breath can encourage, he said. You know already that bones are not solid stone. They are more like coral. Hard, yes, but full of tiny channels. Marrow lives there. If circulation is poor, marrow starves. If marrow starves, bones lose their vitality. He dropped the stick. I will show you a way to breathe, he said. That can help wake these deeper rooms. But understand, this is not magic. It is simply a way of using something you already do 20,000 times a day without thinking. The breathing he taught me was nothing like the panicked gasps I produced while standing practice, nor like the absent-minded breathing I had lived on all my life. We started lying down. On your back, he said. Knees bent a little, feet flat, so your lower back can relax. One hand on your chest, one on your belly. I obeyed, the rock beneath me cool and unyielding. Now inhale, he said, but do not lift the hand on your chest first. Let the belly rise before the ribs move. Imagine the breath is filling from the bottom up, like pouring water into a jar. Belly, then sides, then chest. At first, my body refused. It was as if my lungs were spoiled children, used to being fed only at the top. The chest wanted to rise first. The belly stayed clenched. Gently, he said. Do not force, invite. I tried again. This time, I let my abdomen soften on purpose. It felt vulnerable, exposing that soft place. The hand on my belly rose a little. Yes, he said. Small, but correct. Continue. We practiced for what felt like hours. Inhale from the bottom up. Exhale from the top down. Between the out-breath and the in-breath. A tiny pause. Just long enough to feel that the body did not die when the lungs were briefly empty. Now, he said when the basic pattern had settled in, add intention. He touched the soles of my feet. With each inhale, he said, imagine that something. Not air, but that attention we spoke of. Enters through the soles and rises through the bones of your legs. from toes to ankles, from shins to knees, from knees to hips. With the exhale, imagine it settling into the pelvis, into the lower back, as if the bones are drinking. "It's only imagination," I said. "Of course," he replied. "At first, when you first learned to walk, it was only a clumsy intention to move one foot, then the other. The body turned it into a skill. The same is true here. Bones are not stupid. They respond to where the mind lingers." I did as he said. Inhale, attention from feet up through the long bones of the legs. Exhale, settling into hips and lower spine. Then the same for the arms. Attention entering through the palms, traveling up the forearms, through the elbows, into the shoulders, then up the spine itself, one vertebra at a time, from the tailbone to the base of the skull. Sometimes I felt nothing but air going in and out. Sometimes, though, there was a faint warmth, a tingling deep inside the limbs that was different from muscle fatigue. It was something quieter, like embers waking under ash. At first your mind will say, "This is foolish. Breath cannot reach bone," he said. "Let it talk." Meanwhile, the body will be doing what it always does, listening to patterns. If, for months and years, you pair this breath with this attention, circulation will improve in those places. The marrow will notice. That is all we need. He called this practice marrow breathing. He did it 3 times a week, usually in the evenings, after the demands of the day had faded. I joined him, lying on the cave floor, both of us staring at the smoke-blurred ceiling, directing our breath into the architecture inside us that no one else could see. The mountain did not stay gentle forever. When the first real cold came, it came like a blade. The wind slipped through the seams of my clothing no matter how I wrapped myself. The stone we slept on seemed to store the night chill and return it gladly to my bones. My joints began to ache in a way I hadn't felt since the worst of my growing years. A deep, gnawing pain that felt like something had sunk its teeth into my knees and refused to let go. One night I lay curled as close to the fire as I dared, teeth chattering, every small movement sending a pulse of hurt through hips, back, ankles. My teacher watched me for a long time without speaking. "Cold has gotten into your bones," he said finally. "I'm just not used to this climate," I muttered, embarrassed by the weakness in my voice. He shook his head. "This is not the shiver of a chilly evening," he said. "This is old cold waking up, the kind that has been waiting in your joints for years." The mountain simply gave it an excuse to speak louder. I frowned. Old cold. He poked the fire, sending a shower of sparks upward. "How many winters of your life did you spend with thin shoes?" he asked. "How many times did you stand on wet ground until your feet went numb? How often did you let your lower back be hit by drafts because a coat felt too heavy, or you didn't want to look weak asking for another blanket?" I thought of the stone floor of our house in the valley, always a little damp in winter, of running outside barefoot as a child because I was too impatient to put on shoes, of long evenings leaning against the wall by the door, watching my father work, the cold creeping into my spine. "Cold is patient," he said. "It enters through the feet, the knees, the exposed lower back. It sinks into joints and spaces between bones and waits there. At first it only causes stiffness in the morning, later pain in damp weather, later still deformity. People blame age. They swear the weather has become more cruel. They do not remember the years they let the enemy walk in." He stood and gestured for me to follow. "Come," he said. "It is time you met fire in another form." At the back of the cave, in a nook I had never paid much attention to, he kept bundles of dried leaves and stems bound together with twine. They had a strong, slightly bitter smell even in their dried state. "This is mugwort," he said. "Artemisia. In our medicine, we use it not only as a drink, but as a flame." He sat me down on a flat stone and rolled some of the dried leaves between his hands, shaping them into a small cone about the size of the tip of my thumb. He placed the cone on a piece of thick cloth, then positioned it near the side of my knee, not on top of the bone, but just off to the side where the tendons and ligaments seemed to gather. He lit the cone. At first I smelled only smoke. Then I felt it, a deep, penetrating warmth that was nothing like the diffuse heat of a fire. It was precise, focused, boring slowly into the tissues beneath the skin as if it had been sent there on purpose. "This is moxibustion," he said. "We call it moxa for short. Mugwort has a special quality when it burns. The heat does not just sit on the surface, it dives. It seeks places where cold has taken up residence and urges it to leave. The heat grew more intense. It never quite crossed into pain, but it came close, like a conversation that pressed hard without shouting. Tell me when it is too much," he said. Just before I reached that point, he pinched out the cone, removed the cloth, and replaced it with another cone in a slightly different spot. He worked his way around both knees, then to my ankles, then to the area over my lower back where the kidneys lay hidden. Each time, the same deep heat, the same sense of something rigid softening from within. "Why not just sit closer to the fire?" I asked, lulled by the warmth. "The fire warms the air and surface," he said. "Useful, but not always enough. Moxa is like sending a scouting party inside the walls. It can reach deeper, into channels regular heat passes by." After he finished, I lay back on the blanket. The pain in my joints hadn't disappeared, but it had changed. Less sharp, less clawing. There was a sense of circulation where before there had only been cold stone. "Do you see now why I make you rub your kidneys every night?" he asked. "Why I scold you when you sit with your lower back bare to the wind? This place, feet, knees, low back, is the gateway cold likes best. Keep them warm and you save yourself years of suffering." "What about too much heat?" I asked. "You said imbalance was a thief, even with meat." He smiled. "You listen," he said. "Good, yes. Heat can also harm when it is excessive or misplaced. Flames too close to the skin burn. Anger, another kind of heat, dries the fluids that should lubricate the joints. People who live in constant rage often end up with joints that grind like sand in a mill. Our task is balance. Enough heat to keep the bones alive, enough coolness to keep the fluids flowing. Neither icy stone nor scorched earth." He gestured toward my heart. "Fear is cold," he said. "Anger is hot. You will learn to notice both in your body. When fear freezes you, you will use breath and heat to move again. When anger overheats you, you will use breath and stillness to cool." I slept better that night than I had in weeks. The wind outside still howled. The stone floor was still unforgiving, but the ache in my knees had retreated to a manageable murmur, and my lower back felt less like a block of ice and more like something that belonged to a living person. The next morning, when I stepped out into the crisp air to stand like a tree, my bones greeted the cold not with panic but with a kind of wary familiarity, like hosts who had learned to keep the windows closed when certain guests walked by. As the winter deepened, our routines shifted to accommodate it. We woke later, allowing the sun to do some of the work of warmth. We added more ginger to our broths, more cinnamon to our teas. My teacher wrapped a woolen scarf around his waist every day, even inside the cave. "Never let your lower back shiver," he said. "It is the throne of your kidneys. A king forced to sit on a block of ice will eventually stop issuing wise commands." I watched him move through the snow with a grace I could hardly believe. While the hunters in town complained of stiff joints and aching hips, this man, who had seen nearly a century of such winters, kneaded his own knees each morning, rotated his ankles, fed his joints with careful movements. "People think age is the same as wear," he said once as we both stood in the snow, our breath puffing out in small clouds. "In truth, Age is only the number of seasons your bones have seen. Where depends on how you greeted each of those seasons. We practiced standing even when the ground was frozen. If anything, the cold sharpened my awareness of alignment. Any weight dumped into the wrong place screamed immediately. Feet, sent into numbness by snow, needed extra care. Knees needed more moxa on especially damp days. Winter is when the bones are tested, he said. It is also when they can be most deeply nourished if you know how. The same cold that makes them ache also drives you inward, toward the practices you might neglect when the world is warm and inviting. I began to understand what he meant. There is something about a long, dark winter evening that makes sitting seem less like a chore and more like a refuge. The fire became not just physical warmth, but a companion. The sound of wind outside the cave turned into a reminder of the mountain's age, rather than a threat. One night, as we sat watching the last embers fade, my teacher broke a familiar silence. "You have awakened your bones with striking," he said. "You have begun to feed them through food and herbs. You have stood until they remembered their job. You have breathed into their secret places and chased old cold from their hiding spots." He paused. "There is one more thing you must understand," he said. "Bones do not rebuild during the day." I thought of all the practices we did. Standing, striking, walking, breathing. "Then when?" I asked. His gaze drifted toward the cave mouth, where the stars shone like tiny, distant fires. "At night," he said, "when you surrender this." He tapped my forehead. "And the body is finally left alone to repair what you have asked it to endure." He looked back at me, and there was a gravity in his face that told me this was not a casual topic for him. "You can eat perfectly and train perfectly and still end up brittle," he said, "if you ignore the hours when the bones are supposed to quietly lay down new layers, patch cracks, renew marrow. You can destroy in 1 year of bad sleep what took 10 years to build." He pulled his blanket around his shoulders, not from weakness, but from habit. "Tomorrow," he said, "we will talk about how you sleep, and why, if you want a skeleton that carries you to old age, the hours before midnight matter more than any herb I have ever given you." The fire cracked softly. Outside, the mountain crouched under its blanket of snow, doing what mountains do best, holding inside my own bones, newly awakened, newly fed, newly warmed, seemed to lean in to listen. For most of my life, I thought sleep was something that happened to me, not something I did. You worked until you were tired. You fell over. The dark came. And then, eventually, morning dragged you back out whether you were ready or not. Sleep was a gap, a blank, an absence. Living on the mountain, I learned that was like thinking winter was nothing but cold. One night, late in the winter of my second year with my teacher, I sat up by the fire long after he had lain down. The wind had quieted. The cave was a bowl of soft, flickering light. In the valley, I would have spent such nights reading by oil lamp or staring at the ceiling, mind chewing on worries like an old dog on a bone. Up here, there was less to worry about, but the habit remained. I poked at the embers with a stick, thinking about my father, about all the seasons he would never see. "Why aren't you asleep?" My teacher's voice came from the darkness. I jumped. I had thought he was sleeping. "I'm not tired," I said, which was partly true. The days standing and climbing and striking had worn my body out, but my mind buzzed with that peculiar unrest that comes just when the world gets quiet. He said. There was movement in the shadows as he sat up. "Bring more wood." We fed the fire until it burned bright again. He sat on his blanket, the flames painting the lines of his face in gold and black. "You have learned to wake your bones," he said. "Now you must learn to let them sleep." "I sleep," I protested. "Every night." He gave me a long look. "You close your eyes," he said. "You do not sleep. Not the way bones need." I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Arguing with him when he used that tone was like arguing with the wind. You could do it, but you would look foolish and accomplish nothing. When does a town repair its roads? He asked instead. At noon, when carts and horses and people crowd the streets? Or at night, when everything is still? At night, I said. Exactly, he said. The body is the same. During the day, it is busy. Moving, digesting, reacting, thinking. There is little time to do repairs. At night, when you finally stop demanding things, your body can send workers to patch the cracks. He picked up a twig and snapped it cleanly in two. Every step, every load, every impact leaves small damage in the bones, he said. Tiny fractures too small to notice. This is normal. It is how bones know where to strengthen, but only if, at night, they are given the chance to rebuild. He tossed the broken twig into the fire. If those hours are cut short, interrupted, polluted with late food and late fears, the workers can't finish their job. The next day, new cracks are added on top of the old. Years of this, and the bone finally breaks in a big, dramatic way from what looks like a small accident. A wet step, a tilted basin of water. My father. What does it mean, then, to sleep in a way the bones like? I asked quietly. He held up a finger. First, he said, you must remember you are an animal that evolved with the sun, not with candles and oil lamps and the foolishness of men who think they are smarter than the sky. The body expects darkness when the sun goes down. In that darkness, certain processes wake up. Hormones. The messengers that tell the bones now is the time to rebuild. Rise. If you are still up, squinting at a flame, stuffing food in your mouth, worrying about tomorrow, those messengers grow confused. So I should go to bed earlier, I said. Much earlier, he said. If you sleep deeply in the hours before midnight, the body's rebuilding is strong. If you only collapse after midnight, you miss half of what sleep is meant to do. Half? I repeated. At least, he said. You can't simply make it up later in the morning. The body keeps time. It knows when it is dark outside, even if you pretend otherwise. He held up a second finger. Second, how you lie matters. Your spine is not meant to twist like a rope all night. If you sleep on your stomach, you wrench your neck, compress your lower back, smother your organs. If you sleep on your back with your head on a mountain of pillows, you push your neck forward and pull your spine out of its curves. He shifted onto his side, curling his legs slightly. This is the position that lets the spine rest best, he said. On your side, knees slightly bent, arms relaxed. A pillow that fills the space between shoulder and ear so your neck stays in line with the rest of the spine. Not too high, not too low. He lay flat and patted the ground. And never sleep directly on cold stone if you can help it, he added. The earth steals heat all night long. A mat, a layer of straw, even an extra blanket between you and the ground makes more difference than you think. Moisture and cold entering through the back and hips while you sleep is one of the surest ways to wake up one day in pain and tell yourself you slept wrong. He sat up again and lifted a third finger. Third, do not fill the night with digestion, he said. If you eat a heavy meal late, the body spends those precious deep hours working on your stomach instead of your bones. You feel heavy in the morning, not refreshed. Eat the largest meal when the sun is high and your fire is strong. Keep dinner small, gentle, and early. Think of it like sending the kitchen staff home so the repair crew can work. I thought of the late feasts we'd had after my father finished with patients, the way we'd eaten meat and rice in the dim light while complaining about how tired we were. And lastly, he said, his voice softening, you must learn to put your mind to bed with the rest of you. If you lie down and immediately call up every fear, every regret, every unsolved problem, you turn the hours meant for rebuilding into another battlefield. The nervous system stays on guard. The hormones of alertness flood the body. The bones never get the signal that it's safe to shift from defense to repair. How do I not worry? I asked. I don't choose the thoughts that come. You choose whether to feed them, he said. Before sleep, give your mind something simple to do. Watch the breath count to 10 and back down. Feel the warmth in your belly from the day's practice. Scan the body from head to toe, thanking each part for carrying you. If a worry arises, nod to it like you would nod to a passerby on the road. Then let it keep walking. Do not invite it in for tea. He lay down again, arranging himself on his side, knees bent, hands resting on his lower belly. I do this every night, he said. I place my hands here, over the dantian. I feel the rise and fall of the breath, and I say, thank you for carrying me again. Now rebuild what needs rebuilding while I get out of the way. It is a small ritual, but over decades it tells the bones, the organs, the whole system, these hours belong to you. He closed his eyes. Tonight, he said, you will not sit up and worry at the fire. You will lie down when I do. You will not argue. That is the first discipline. I lay down, stiff and skeptical. The idea that when I slept, something silent and intelligent was at work inside my bones was both comforting and unnerving. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I could not ignore the difference. I forced myself. At first out of obedience, then out of curiosity. To lie down within an hour of sunset. Dinner became simpler. Broths, steamed vegetables, a small bowl of grains instead of a mountain of meat. I practiced the breathing he had taught me, but slower, gentler, watching the breath roll in and out like a quiet tide. I still woke sometimes in the night with old fears gripping my chest, but slowly they came less often. And even when they did, my body no longer felt as if it had been hit by a cart by morning. My morning stiffness began to fade, not all at once, but there was a new kind of ease in my joints when I first stood up. The ache in my lower back lessened. My mood shifted. I no longer felt like I was dragging myself uphill all day. Your bones look more awake in the morning, my teacher commented once, as if they had faces he could read. How can you tell? I asked. He shrugged. Old habit, he said. After a while, you learn to see how much sleep a man is missing by the way his spine carries his head. He looked at me, and there was something gentler in his gaze than usual. Your father did many things right, he said. He fed people well. He set bones carefully. But he lived like a man, always running out of time. Long nights, short sleep, worries as thick as the herbs on his shelves. His bones paid for that haste in the end. He closed his eyes briefly, as if offering a moment of silence not just for my father, but for everyone who treated sleep as an inconvenience instead of a cornerstone. Do not repeat his mistake, he said. Honor his knowledge by improving on his life. I did my best. Over the years, I came to think of sleep not as a blank space, but as a quiet workshop inside the dark. A place where, while I lay motionless, my skeleton grew a little more trustworthy each night. Provided I had not overloaded it during the day and had given it the conditions it liked at night. Training, food, herbs, heat, breath, sleep. It seemed a lot to do just to have bones that didn't betray me. But by then, I had already seen what happened when people did none of it. And soon, I would see another kind of mistake. What happened when someone tried to skip the slow, patient parts and jump straight to power. Mayday. He arrived in the third summer, just as the snow had finally retreated from the highest peaks. I heard him before I saw him. A clatter of stones, a string of curses, the heavy stomp of boots unused to mountain paths. My teacher and I were in the clearing, taking our joints through their morning range of motion. My shoulders were circling slowly. My teacher's wrists were making lazy figure eights in the air. Ah, my teacher said, tilting his head, listening. We have a visitor from the world of noise. A moment later, a young man staggered into view, breathing hard. He was broad-shouldered and thick through the chest, with arms like logs and a neck that looked carved from a single piece of wood. His hair was cropped short. His jaw was shadowed with stubble. Scars crisscrossed his face like pale threads. His hands caught my attention most. The knuckles were huge and misshapen, the skin over them thick and shiny, as if it had been laid down in layers. They did not look like human hands so much as like someone had tried to sculpt fists out of old root and stone. "You the Iron Bones hermit?" he demanded, once he'd gotten enough breath to speak. My teacher bowed slightly. "People call me many things," he said. "That is one of them." The young man snorted. "They say you can take a beating from clubs without a bruise," he said. "That you fell from a cliff and walked away. That your bones are harder than rock." "People say a lot," my teacher replied. "Some of it is even true." The young man thrust out one of his grotesque fists. "You see these?" he said. "I've been conditioning my hands since I was 12, punching sand, then gravel, then rocks, breaking bricks, tiles, boards. My bones are iron." He flexed his fingers. The skin cracked a little around the calluses. "I've beaten men twice my size," he went on. "Knocked them down with one blow. In the city, they pay to watch me fight. But I am not satisfied. I heard of you and your ancient methods. I want to see if they're worth anything." He jabbed a thumb at his own chest. "I challenge you," he said. "Show me your iron bones, old man. If you're as strong as they say, I'll stay and learn. If not, I'll go back and tell everyone the mountain legend is just another old fool's story." I felt heat rush to my face. "You can't." I began, but my teacher held up a hand. "Easy," he said. "A challenge is just a question asked with too much noise." He turned to the young man. "What is your name?" he asked. "Zhao Hu," he replied. "They call me Tiger Zhao." "Very well, Tiger Zhao," my teacher said. "You have traveled far. Your legs must be tired. Come, sit, drink tea. Then we will see what there is to see." The fighter looked as if he wanted to protest. Seeking hospitality when you meant to challenge someone was not part of the script he had written for himself. But the mountain had taken much from him on the way up. In the end, thirst won. We sat together by the fire. My teacher poured tea as if this were a social visit. Zhao Hu downed his cup in one swallow and slammed it onto the rock. "You going to hit me or not?" he asked. My teacher regarded his deformed hands with interest, as if examining an unusual specimen. "You have done many things to your bones," he said. "Tell me, do your hands hurt when it rains?" Zhao Hu blinked. "How did you?" "And how is your grip when you wake in the morning?" My teacher continued. "Does it take some time before your fingers obey you fully?" The fighter's jaw tightened. "It's the price of power," he said. "These," he held up his fists, "are my weapons." My teacher nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, "they are weapons. The question is whether, in 20 years, they will still belong to you, or whether you will belong to them." Zhao Hu scowled. "Enough old man riddles," he snapped. "Show me what your bone training can do." My teacher stood. "Very well," he said. "Come." He walked over to a boulder near the edge of the clearing. It was as tall as my chest and wide as a door, its surface rough and unremarkable, mottled with lichen. He placed his palm on the rock for a moment, almost gently, as if greeting an old friend. Then he drew his hand back a little, relaxed his shoulders, and struck. There was no dramatic wind-up, no shout, no stamping of feet, just a short, precise movement from his center out through his arm into his open palm. The sound it made was not what I expected. It wasn't a slap or a crack. It was a deep, dull thud, like a hammer striking something dense. When he pulled his hand away, there was a thin crack in the rock, running a few inches from the point of impact. His palm was the same pale, lined palm I had seen 1,000 times. No redness, no swelling, no broken skin. Zhao Hu stared. He walked closer, touched the crack with his fingertips as if suspecting a trick. Then he seized my teacher's hand and turned it over, looking for some sign of sorcery. "This," he said. "How?" "Not with these," my teacher said, flexing his fingers. "With this." He tapped his forearm, then his shoulder, then his chest. "And with these." He tapped his ribs, his hips, his feet. "Bone does not become strong in isolation. It is part of a chain. You have tried to harden only the links you punch with. The rest of your chain will fail first." Zhao Hu's face flushed. His pride fought with his awe. "I want to learn that," he said at last, his voice rough. "Not just for fighting, for everything. So I'm not broken like the old men in my village before I reach 50. My teacher nodded. "You can stay," he said, "under one condition." "Name it," Zhao Hu said. "You must forget everything you think you know about hardening the body," my teacher said. "Those hands of yours are monuments to the belief that damage equals strength. Up here, that belief will get you nothing but pain." Zhao Hu looked at his fists, at the knots of bone and scar. For the first time I saw not pride in his eyes, but a hint of fear. "They're all I have," he said quietly. "No," my teacher said. "They are all you've used. The rest of you is waiting." It was not an easy thing, watching a man dismantle his own legend. The first lesson my teacher gave him was not how to hit, but how to stop hitting. For weeks, Zhao Hu was forbidden to strike anything harder than his own lightly padded forearms. His knuckles were given rest for the first time in years. "They hurt more now," he complained one evening, flexing his fingers by the fire. "Of course," my teacher said. "When you stop yelling at a wounded animal, it finally has space to cry." They started him where I had started, with Paida, with the gentle awakening of bones all over the body. At first, his strikes were too hard, fueled by habit and ego. My teacher corrected him again and again. "Your bones are not your enemies," he told him. "Stop beating them as if they were. Learn the difference between enough and too much." They added standing practice. Zhao Hu, who had spent his life in motion, pacing before fights, circling opponents, lunging, dodging, found stillness even harder than I had. "What does this have to do with punching?" he demanded on the 4th day, sweat dripping from his nose as his thighs shook. "Everything," my teacher said. "You want to deliver power through your bones? First, you must be sure those bones know how to stack under load without wobbling. You cannot build on swamp." He taught Zhao Hu about herbs and food, about sesame and bone broth and the bitter root formulas I was still learning to love. The fighter grumbled at first, suspicious of anything that did not feel like immediate effort. "If you stimulate bone without feeding it," my teacher said, "you are like a man who whips his horse and never gives it hay." Slowly, the hard edges of Zhao Hu's strength began to soften. His shoulders dropped from around his ears. The way he walked changed. There was less bounce, more groundedness. He began to notice things. How his wrists felt on damp days, how his elbows appreciated being warmed before work. Months passed. He stayed, only after his hands had fully healed. After the last of the constantly inflamed skin had cooled, after the worst of the ache had settled. Did my teacher begin to teach him how to strike again? This time, it was different. They started with sacks of beans, not sand or stone. Each impact was measured, never going past a certain threshold. There were days of rest between sessions. Bone responds slowly, my teacher said. You cannot rush its rebuilding. If you train hard today and are not more sensitive tomorrow, you are not paying attention. They kept track of more than size and hardness. They watched flexibility, grip, sensitivity. A truly strong bone does not become a dead club, my teacher told him. It remains alive, Responsive, it can bear impact and still feel the seed beneath its surface. As the months turned to years, the grotesque swelling of Zhao Hu's knuckles began to recede. They would never look delicate, but they lost their monstrous, claw-like appearance. He regained the full bend of each finger. The scars remained, but like old stories finally told, they stopped shouting. One day, as we rested after a training session, he held his hands up to the light, turning them. "I used to be proud of how ugly they were," he said. "The uglier, the stronger. I thought, now I see they were just swollen from injury, like a sprained ankle you never let heal. I was proud of my limp and called it a strut." He looked at my teacher. "What you showed me," he said. "It's slower, but it feels clean, like building a wall brick by brick instead of slapping mud on a cracked one." My teacher smiled. "The fast path is almost always the path of damage," he said. "The slow path is almost always the path of true strength, not just in bones, in everything." Zhao Hu nodded. Years later, after he had left the mountain and come back again, after he had gone to test his new strength in the world and returned not with boastful stories but with quiet eyes, he would tell students of his own. "I spent 10 years learning to punch hard and nearly ruined my hands. I spent 3 years learning to stand and can now hit harder and live better than I ever did before." I listened to him with the strange feeling one has when hearing a story you've watched from the inside. It reinforced what the mountain had been teaching me since I first arrived, gasping and ashamed. Bones had no interest in how impressive you looked today. They were always asking the same question: "What are you doing that we can still support 20 years from now?" I wish I could say that after all this, my own path was smooth. It wasn't. The problem started as a small annoyance in my lower back. At first I blamed the standing practice, then the cold, then the sleeping mat. Anything but the possibility that I, the diligent student of bones, might be doing something wrong. The ache was sly. It never stabbed. Instead, it crept in after long days, a tightness just above my hips, a fatigue that made me want to lean forward when I walked. In the mornings, my lower back felt stiff, as if someone had poured plaster into my spine while I slept. One evening, after I tried and failed to stand for my usual 40 minutes, I straightened up with a grimace and pressed a hand to the sore spot. My teacher watched me. "Come here," he said. The tone in his voice made me nervous. He had me remove my shirt and stand with my back toward him. I felt his fingers trace along my spine, vertebra by vertebra, as familiar with each bump as he was with the ridges of the mountains. "Walk," he said. I walked the length of the cave and back, feeling his eyes on me like invisible hands. Bend forward, now backward, to the side. I did as he asked, wincing when a particular movement sent a sharp reminder through my lower back. He grunted. "Your bones are growing stronger," he said, "but the tower they form is not straight." "The tower?" I asked. "Your spine," he said. "The axis. You have focused so much on making the bricks strong that you forgot to check if the wall is leaning." He led me to a polished metal plate we used as a crude mirror. Standing behind me, he guided my gaze with his hand. "Look," he said. At first I saw only the usual, my thin back, the ridges of muscle along either side of the spine. Then I noticed it, one shoulder slightly higher than the other, a subtle curve where the line of the spine should have been straight, my head slightly forward, as if perpetually reaching for something. "It is not dramatic," he said, "but it is enough to cause trouble. One hip rotates forward more than the other. The lower back arches more than it should. When you stand, the weight does not travel cleanly through each vertebra. Some are compressed, others are overworked. The discs between them, the soft cushions, are bearing loads they were not designed for." "So my posture is bad," I said, trying to make it sound trivial. He shook his head. Bad posture is what people say when they don't understand the consequences, he said. This is misalignment. Build a house on a slanted foundation, and even if the bricks are hard, the house will crack. The same with your spine. He had me lie on the floor and placed a hand under the curve of my lower back. Feel this? He asked. Too much lordosis. The curve is too deep. The vertebrae pinch together at the back. No wonder they complain. I swallowed. Can herbs fix it? I asked, half joking. Herbs can soften what is too tight and strengthen what is too weak, he said. But they cannot move bones into new positions. That requires awareness and time. He rolled up his own sleeves. I will show you some movements, he said. They are not glamorous. You will not impress anyone with them. But if you do them every day, they will slowly teach your spine a new story. The first exercise was done lying on my back. I pulled both knees gently toward my chest, feeling the stretch along my lower back. Now let your knees fall to one side, he said, while keeping your shoulders on the ground. Turn your head to the opposite side, slowly. Do not force. As I twisted, a series of small pops ran along my spine, like a string of muted firecrackers. This is like wringing out a wet cloth, he said. Old tension, old stuckness, pressing out. Do both sides every day. He put me on my hands and knees next. Cat and cow, he said, though he used older, stranger names. Frightened cat, old horse. Round your back up, he instructed. Pretend someone has punched the air from your belly. Let your head drop. Now slowly reverse. Let the belly sink. Lift the head. Feel the tailbone tilt up, back and forth. One vertebra at a time, if you can. Done mindlessly, it would have been easy. Done with the kind of slow control he demanded, it was surprisingly hard. I could feel which segments of my spine moved easily and which were stiff as carved wood. You see, he said, you have places that move too much to make up for places that hardly move at all. Balance that out, and the load distributes more evenly. He took me to a sturdy pine tree in front of the cave and pointed to a low branch. Hang, he said. I wrapped my fingers around the branch and let my weight sink down. At first, my shoulders took most of it, reluctant to surrender. Eventually, my grip relaxed enough that I felt a gentle stretching along my spine, each vertebra being invited. Not forced. To create space. Monkey wisdom, he said. They spend their lives hanging and rarely have the back problems humans do. Gravity compresses us all day. Sometimes we must ask it to work in the opposite direction. He also began correcting me during ordinary tasks. When I sat, he would tap my shoulder blades. Don't collapse, he'd say. Stack. When I walked, he'd remind me, head over spine, not reaching forward like a turtle. Let your eyes move, not your neck alone. When I lifted a bucket of water or a bundle of firewood, he'd stop me mid-bend. Use your legs, not your lower back, he would say. Your thighs are big muscles. That's their job. If you bend like that 1,000 times, your discs will remember each insult. It was humbling. I had thought of myself as a serious student, but my habits had been bending my spine for years in ways I barely noticed. For months, my evenings included those strange, gentle movements, twisting like a rope, arching and rounding like cat and horse, hanging from the pine, lying on my back and simply noticing where the floor met me and where it didn't. Slowly, things changed. The ache in my lower back stopped being a constant and became an occasional visitor. My standing practice improved. I could hold the posture longer without feeling as if my lumbar vertebrae were being squeezed together. One morning, after watching me move through the joint warm-up, my teacher nodded. Better, he said. Your spine is more like a well-balanced bow now. Before, it was like a bow left strung too tight for too long. He touched the center of my back. Remember this, he said. You can have the strongest bones in the world, But if the axis they attach to is crooked, you will still suffer. In life, as in the body, strength without alignment leads to pain. I thought of the men in the valley, bent double from years of carrying loads on one shoulder, the proud warriors with broad chests and ruined backs, the way a tree, no matter how thick its trunk, could be toppled if it grew leaning too far to one side. Keep your spine honest, he said. The rest of you will have an easier time telling the truth. By the time my third winter on the mountain gave way to a shy spring, my teacher was in his late 90s. If his own count could be believed, I had watched him through every season now, and one thing baffled me more than all the herbs and breathing and standing. He moved like a young man, not in speed. He did everything at a pace that matched his breath. But in the quality of his movement, his knees bent without hesitation, his hips rotated freely, his shoulders rolled in wide circles when he reached for something above his head. There was none of the stiffness I had come to associate with old age in the valley. One morning, as we walked down to a spring to collect water, I slipped on a loose stone and caught myself with a sharp jolt through my right knee. The joint protested. I winced and rubbed it. "You feel that?" my teacher asked. "Yes," I said. "It's just my knee complaining." He nodded. "Most people ignore that complaint until it becomes a lawsuit," he said. "Then they blame time." At the spring, after we filled our buckets, he sat on a nearby rock and rolled his own knee in small circles. "Knees, hips, shoulders, fingers," he said. "These are places where bones meet. Without them, you would be a statue. With them, you can dance. When they are healthy, you do not think of them at all. When they suffer, your world shrinks to the distance between your bed and the toilet." He looked at his hand, slowly opening and closing the fingers. "People talk of bone strength as if bones exist alone," he said. "But bones do not move without joints, and joints are delicate, cartilage, synovial fluid, ligaments, tendons, many parts, all easily offended." "What is the main enemy?" I asked. "Age, cold, neglect," he said. "Neglect wears 100 masks. Cold, yes. Also weight repeated in the wrong way. Also the crime of stillness and the crime of excess." He stood. "Come," he said. "From today, you will feed your joints every morning before doing anything harder." He started with his toes, flexing, curling, spreading them as far as they would go in his worn cloth shoes. Then his ankles, making slow circles, first one direction, then the other. "Knees," he said, bending and straightening them gently, then rotating them in tiny, careful circles. Never force, never twist under load. Hips came next, drawing imaginary circles with his knees, then swaying side to side. Then the spine. Gentle twists, slow forward bends, the cat and horse again. He moved up to the shoulders, making large, rolling circles, bringing the shoulder blades together, then apart. Elbows, wrists, each finger individually. Finally, the neck, side bends, gentle rotations, looking up, down, and over each shoulder. The whole sequence took about 20 minutes. When he finished, there was a subtle glow under his skin, a looseness that made him seem 10 years lighter. "This is joint feeding?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "You pump the synovial fluid through the joint spaces by moving them. That fluid carries nutrients to the cartilage and carries away waste. Without movement, it stagnates. Cartilage starves and dries. Even if your blood is rich, people think their joints wear out because of age. Often, they wore out because the fluid that was supposed to feed them never moved." He picked up his bucket again. "You do this every morning," he said. "Summer and winter, even if you are sick. Especially if you are sick. A body confined to bed will lose joint health faster than it loses hair." I adopted his routine. At first it felt unnecessary. an extra chore before the real work of standing and striking. But the first time I had to sprint down the mountain path to help a hunter who had twisted his ankle, and my knees cooperated without a twinge. I became a believer. Are there foods for joints, too? I asked one evening, rubbing my knees after a long day. Of course, he said. You know some of them already. Bone broth again. For the gelatin, the collagen building blocks, seaweeds and certain mushrooms, the slippery ones, that remind you of cartilage when you chew them. Our ancestors noticed that foods with a certain texture often help the places in the body that share that texture, like nourishes like, as we have said. He mentioned herbs as well. A root called du huo that drove cold and damp from the joints, a vine called wei ling xian that wound its way into knotty places and helped untie them, a mistletoe that grew on mulberry trees that the old books said strengthened sinews and bones. But remember this, he said, you cannot out-eat or out-herb bad movement. No potion will keep your joints healthy if you never take them through their full, gentle range when they are not under load. You cannot sit all day like a stone and then expect to run like a deer on the weekend without paying a price. He demonstrated a few movements he had learned from wandering monks. Slow, flowing sequences that took the joints through spirals and arcs. The purpose of these is not to look beautiful, he said, though they do, when done with devotion. The purpose is to remind the joints of every direction they are capable of moving before life demands something sudden of them. Over time, I noticed something that startled me. My teacher's joints did not make noise. There were no pops in his knees when he stood, no grinding in his shoulders when he lifted his arms, no crackling in his neck when he turned his head. My own joints, which had protested and snapped when I first came up the mountain, grew quieter as the years passed. The morning stiffness retreated. The ache in damp weather became a whisper instead of a shout. Old age will still come, my teacher said. When I remarked on this, we are not gods. Cartilage will thin, fluids will change. But there is a difference between a door hinge that squeaks for 20 years and one that opens and closes smoothly until the very end. Which kind do you want to be? He asked many questions like that. Each time, I realized the answer depended not on luck but on the hundreds of small choices. I chose, again and again, to move my joints, to feed them, to warm them, to respect their limits. In return, they carried me further than my childhood self would ever have believed. My teacher turned 103 in the spring of my 12th year on the mountain. We did not have a cake, or candles, or any of the markers people in towns use to prove to themselves that time has passed. We had the usual, rice, sesame, a broth made from bones given to us by a hunter with more gratitude than money. Do you feel different? I asked him that morning as we stretched our joints in the first light. He rolled his shoulders and tilted his head side to side, neck moving without protest. My joints creak less than some men's at 60, he said. My bones hurt less than they did at 40. Time is a strange thing. It takes what you neglect and gives back what you cultivate. I do not feel my age in my bones. I feel it in my memories. He looked out over the valley, where the fields were a distant patchwork of new green. You will probably outlive me by many decades, he said, not unkindly. That is as it should be. When I am gone, your bones will be the proof that I was here. I laughed nervously. You're not going anywhere, I said. You stand longer than I do. He smiled. One day, he said, maybe not this year, maybe not next, but eventually, this body will decide it has had enough of carrying me, and I will listen. Until then, we practice. We practiced. We stood like trees. We struck our bones and listened to their hum. We sat and breathed, warmed our kidneys, boiled bitter herbs, fed our joints, slept like men who expected to be rebuilt each night. If anything, He grew more consistent as his years piled up. There were no rest days for him, only lighter days and heavier days, but never a day when he did nothing. It happened, when it finally happened, in a way that felt so ordinary it was almost easy to miss the importance of it. The day was clear. The sky had the washed blue of early spring. A few patches of snow still clung to the northern faces of nearby peaks, but around our cave, the ground was damp and dark and full of the smell of thawed earth. We woke as usual. We rubbed heat into our lower backs. We took our joints through their morning sequence. We stood together in the clearing. He gave me one small correction on my posture. Relax the chest a little. Let the weight drop more directly through the heel. And then praised the solidity he felt when he pressed my shoulder. Your bones have come a long way from the ones that first crawled up here, he said. We ate breakfast, millet, sesame, a few dried greens. He drank his herb formula, wincing only slightly at the taste after decades of practice. Then he sat at the cave entrance, as he often did, watching the clouds shift shapes over the valley. I'm going to gather more wood, I said, picking up the hand axe. He nodded. Don't go too far, he said. The thaw can make the ground treacherous. I was gone perhaps an hour. The forest below the cave was full of fallen branches, offerings from winter storms. I collected an armful thick enough to last us several days and climbed back up, lungs working, legs solid. When I came around the last bend, the cave mouth came into view. He was still there, sitting in his usual place. At first I thought he was watching the sky with his eyes closed. Then I noticed the angle of his head, the way his hands rested just so on his knees, the stillness that was not the stillness of a man meditating, but of a man who had set something down and forgotten to pick it back up. I put the wood down quietly. Master? I said softly. He did not answer. I stepped closer. There was no slackness in his face, no grimace. If anything, he looked more himself than he ever had, all the lines of him etched clearly, without the animation of breath to blur them. I placed my fingers where I knew his pulse best, on the inside of his wrist. Nothing. He had simply stopped. No fall, no drawn-out sickness, no battle lost in a hospital bed to forces he did not understand. He had done his standing practice, eaten his breakfast, watched his mountains, and then, at some point between one breath and the next, decided his work here was done. I sat down beside him. For a long time, I did not cry. I just sat, feeling the weight of my own bones, the complexity of my own joints, the rhythm of my own breath. Every part of me that he had helped shape seemed to buzz with awareness. Thank you, I said finally, out loud, because it felt wrong to keep that inside. For these, I touched my own femur, my shin, my ribs. Then I did what needed to be done. There were rituals for death in the valley, prayers and incense and the proper number of days to wear white. Up here, there was only the mountain. I built a pyre from the wood I had gathered and more besides. I wrapped him in the cloth he had used as a blanket for as long as I had known him. I whispered what words I could remember from my father's funeral. When the fire took him, I watched the smoke rise and wondered how many bones he had mended, how many backs he had straightened, how many knees he had coaxed into moving again. I wondered whether the mountain would miss his footsteps. A week later, when the immediate ache had softened into a dull emptiness, I began cleaning the cave. That was when I found the box. It was hidden in a crack in the back wall, behind a stack of old pots. I would never have seen it if one pot hadn't slipped from my hands and shattered, sending shards skittering across the floor. The box was small and made of dark wood, its surface worn smooth by time. Inside were a few bundles of wrapped herbs, rare ones, from the look and smell of them. And, beneath those, a stack of thin, brittle manuscripts. On top of the manuscripts lay a folded letter with my name. My hands shook a little as I opened it. The handwriting was his. Tight, neat characters, each stroke deliberate. If you are reading this, it means this old body has finally decided to retire. Do not be sad. I have lived more than a century. No one owes me extra days. By now you know most of what I learned in this life about bones. I taught you what the masters taught me and what my own trials taught me. But there is something I have not said directly, because some truths must be felt before they can be understood. So I will say it now, in case grief has made your ears heavy. The letter went on, but already my eyes blurred. I wiped them and kept reading. Everything I showed you about bones was never only about bones. When I told you that bones are the foundation, I meant also that your character is the foundation of your life. A house built on weak bones collapses. A life built on weak principles does the same. Strengthen your skeleton, yes, but also strengthen the part of you that decides what is right and wrong. When I made you wake your bones with gentle strikes, I meant also, do not live a life without challenge. Too much comfort makes both bones and people soft. Too much violence breaks them. Find the amount of difficulty that wakes you without destroying you. When I fed you sesame and bone broth and herbs, I meant also, be careful what you feed your mind and heart. Books, stories, conversations, the company you keep. These are all foods. Some nourish, some rot you from the inside. When I warned you about the thieves of bone, sugar, salt, excess meat, stillness, fear, I meant also the thieves of the spirit, people who drain you, habits that hollow you out, thoughts that gnaw at you with no benefit. Learn to recognize them. Close the door. I could almost hear his voice speaking the words. When I showed you how cold enters through the feet and the lower back, I meant also, be careful of the coldness that can enter the heart. There are people and experiences that chill you, that make you want to stop trusting, stop loving. Do not let that cold reach the bones of your soul. Warmth is as necessary for the spirit as for the kidneys. When I taught you to sleep early, to lie in a way that lets the spine rest, to clear the mind before bed, I meant also value rest in all things. There are seasons of doing and seasons of being. If you never let your mind and spirit enter their night, you will never be rebuilt in ways you cannot plan. When I corrected your posture, insisting your head be over your spine and not thrust forward, I meant also, keep your integrity. Your spine is your physical honesty. Your ethics are your life's spine. Do not bend them for convenience. Temporary comfort is not worth a crooked axis. When I made you feed your joints every morning, I meant also, feed the joints in your life. The places where you meet other people. Relationships are like joints, meant to move, to flex. If you let them freeze with resentment or grind with constant conflict, your world's range of motion shrinks. The next lines made my throat tighten. One day, people will come to you as you came to me, afraid of breaking, confused, full of half-true ideas from doctors and neighbors. Some will listen, some will not. Teach them anyway. Do not try to be me. Do not tell your students that my way is the only way. Add what you learn from your own bones, from your own students, from whatever new knowledge the world discovers. Let the lineage be alive, not a museum. You once asked me how I wanted to be remembered. I told you it did not matter. That was not entirely honest. I would like this much. When your bones carry you easily up a hill at 70, when your knees bend without complaint as you sit on the ground to play with a child, when your spine remains a proud tree instead of a question mark, remember that an old man hid himself with bamboo on a mountain for many years and taught you to do the same. In that way, my bones will still be walking, even when their dust is long gone. And when you correct a young man's posture, or show an old woman how to warm her kidneys, or convince a stubborn fighter to rest his hands, tell them the principles, not my name. Let the teachings be the bones that outlast us all. The letter ended with a line that was both simple and heavy. Take care of your bones, and they will take care of you. take care of your life, and it will take care of others. Oh, the old man you once thought was fragile. I folded the letter with shaking hands and pressed it briefly to my forehead in the old gesture of respect my father had taught me. Then I placed it back in the box, not as something to hide, but as something I knew I would read again when doubt crept in. Years have passed since that day. I left the mountain eventually, not because I wanted to, but because staying forever would have been another kind of hiding. The valley needed what I had learned. So did the towns beyond it. I opened a small practice at the edge of a city. On the window, instead of bone clinic or orthopedic specialist, I wrote simply, Bones and Life People came. At first, they came because they had heard rumors of a strange healer who made them stand still instead of giving them pills. A few came because nothing else had worked. Most came because pain had finally made them willing to listen. I saw knees worn out by years of carrying too much weight and too many grudges. I saw backs bent from shame as much as from bad chairs. I saw fingers stiff from work and from holding on too tightly to things that should have been released. I taught them what my teacher had taught me, filtered through my own words. They thought standing with knees slightly bent was a leg exercise. I knew it was a character exercise, too. They thought rubbing their lower back was about warming tissue. I knew it was also about warming a part of themselves they had neglected. They thought eating sesame was about calcium. I knew it was about making a small promise to their skeleton every day. Some listened. Some didn't. The ones who did changed slowly. They fell less. They recovered faster when they did. Their fear of breaking loosened its grip. I grew older. My hair grayed, my face lined. Patients began calling me Old Master, even when I protested. One morning, many years into this new life, I stood alone in a small courtyard behind my house, feet firm on the ground, arms lifted as if embracing a tree. The city sounds were distant. The sun had just cleared the rooftop. I settled into the familiar burn of my legs, the familiar depth that followed. My bones hummed their quiet song of wait and response. I felt, as I often did in those moments, that my teacher was standing beside me, not in some mystical way, just in the sense that the posture in my body had once been in his, that the breath moving through my ribs had once moved through his, that the principles he had given me were now moving through others I had taught. Footsteps sounded behind me. I released the posture slowly and turned. A young woman stood at the gate. Her clothes were modern. The lines of the world had moved on. But the look in her eyes was as old as mine had been when I first climbed the mountain. "I'm sorry," she said. "Are you the one who helps with bones?" "You've heard strange stories," I said. She hesitated, then nodded. "I fall a lot," she said. "My wrists, my ankles, they break so easily. The doctors say my bones are weak. They give me pills, but..." She lifted a shoulder helplessly. "I heard you help in a different way." I saw, in the way she held herself, the same carefulness I had carried as a boy, the same flinch around wet ground, the same fear of gravity. I gestured her in. "Yes," I said, "I know something about bones that like to break." As she stepped into the courtyard, I felt the weight of my own skeleton, the solidity of my own feet, the ease of my own joints. I thought of the mountain, of a thin old man striking his forearms in the cold air, of a cave full of bones and a letter in a small wooden box. I smiled. "Let me tell you about a man who woke his bones every morning with the palm of his hand," I said, "and about black sesame seeds, and about how fear lives in the kidneys, and about how to stand like a tree." Her shoulders dropped, just a little, at the promise in my tone, and as I began to speak, I felt, deep inside my own bones, a familiar echo, a lineage continuing, a life carried forward. Skin and flesh come and go. Bones last longer. Teachings, if they are true, last longer still.